The last round of the fight between mechanical and electronic TV took place in Britain, John Logie Baird versus EMI. Baird's experimental transmissions were closed down by the BBC in September 1935 after 1,500 programs. A government report recommended a final and decisive competition between Baird's system and EMI's electronic system in a 6-month trial. A studio took shape at Alexandra Palace, 12 miles north of London. In an attempt to boost sales at a radio trade exhibition, transmissions began in August 1936 with the manicured voice of Elizabeth Cowell.
Hello, Radio Olympia. This is direct television from the studios at the Alexandra Palace. And now you're going to see and hear someone you know well, Miss Helen Mackay. Looking at you from out of the blue. Don't make a fuss, but settle down and look at us. It seems hardly true.
The British press was more excited than ever about television and suspicious. Can television see into your home? Asked London's Daily Express. Will television sterilize the population? The Daily Telegraph suggested some exotic names for television viewers. Teleseer, Televist, Audobserver, Autovist, Inviter, Telegazer, Visioneer, Beholder, Opticarius, Ingazer, and Bairder. The word viewer was rejected. 3 months later, on November 2nd, 1936, the BBC opened their regular television service with another song, Magic Rays of Light. The Times of London wrote, "The moment long seen afar off by eyes of faith has come at last." The man responsible for organizing the new BBC service was Cecil Madden.
So in the first week, we were able to say that we'd done a play, a ballet, and an opera, 2 editions of Picture Page, a variety show on the Saturday night, and a good many items all round in between. So we opened really pretty big.
In 3 months, the Baird system was eliminated from the competition. Electronic TV had won, just in time for an enormous television challenge, the coronation of King George VI.
I really did think we were really breaking new ground, that this was showing the great possibilities of television, because seeing something while it was happening, some event while it was happening, was always thought in our minds at that time, and I think in public minds too, as the real job of television. It was always proclaimed by Baird and others that soon you'll be sitting in your home seeing the derby and events in all parts of the world coming live to you, sitting in your armchairs, that kind of thing, you see. And this is what we thought in those days really was what television was for.
By the late 30s, television services were springing up across Europe, but they were still broadcasting to tiny audiences. In France, by 1938, there were still only 400 sets. Germany's accomplished and ambitious service was televising to just 11 public viewing rooms. And the Soviet Union, although a forerunner in the development of electronic television, had only a few hundred sets in the late 30s. Here in America, CBS had begun experimental transmissions, but NBC was poised for a major launch. Arthur Hungerford described their first telecast, July 7th, 1936.
The first program on July 7th of 1936 began with General Harbord, who was the chairman of the board of the RCA, and David Sarnoff was the president. and Lennox Lore, who was the president of NBC. They all wanted to be in on the act. This was the big beginning of television in America. And it was sort of an office scene, and they just told how television just around the corner. And then we went into a variety show. First thing, as I remember, was a fashion show with 3 lovely models and a narrator. Then we had a bit of a comedy scene with Edwin, who was very well known in this country, and Graham McNamee. Then to show drama, we had a long-running show called Tobacco Road at that time on Broadway, and the star of that was Henry Hull. We brought him over and sat him on a stool, and we did that. And then as a sort of a climax, we had the Pickens sisters, one of the best known group of singers at that time. And then the idea was to show dancing. So Russell Market came over from the music hall, which is just across the street, to see what place we had for the dancers. It turned out, instead of 120 dancers that they use on the music hall stage, we had room for 3.
Less than 3 years later, NBC was ready to begin a regular broadcast service. As its curtain raiser, the network telecast to approximately 1,000 viewers a major event. President Roosevelt at the opening ceremonies of the New York World's Fair.
I hereby dedicate the World's Fair, the New York World's Fair of 1939, and I declare it open to all mankind.
The World's Fair was a grand, optimistic vision of the future. Later, that same opening day, David Sarnoff dedicated RCA's pavilion at the fair with a telecast in which he announced the new era of commercial television.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It is fitting that the greatest World's Fair in history should be the scene for the first public showing of one of the most significant technical and social advances of modern times. On April 30th, the National Broadcasting Company will begin the first regular public television program service in the history of our country, and television receiving sets will be in the hands of merchants in the New York area for public purchase. A new art and a new industry, which eventually will provide entertainment and information for millions, and new employment for large numbers of men and women, is here.
In spite of Sarnoff's announcement, initial sales were less than brisk.
They may have been for sale, but there weren't too many of them bought. In the early days of television in New York, the first year or two, there weren't more than 120 of them in all of New York. And the majority of those were in one of 2 places, RCA and NBC executives' homes or bars. And that's about the size of it. The first set was called the TRK 660. It was a huge thing, stood about that high, possibly 4.5 feet high, had a hinged lid with a mirror inside. And you lifted the lid and looked at the picture reflected in the mirror, because the tube, the pickup tube, or is known as the kinescope, was so huge that there was no way of putting that in the cabinet and getting it out it would stick out in the middle of the room. Well, at that price and at that size, nobody wanted them. They couldn't sell them. I can recall distinctly, I bought a brand new car in 1940 for $1,000, and they wanted $660 for this TV set when there was virtually nothing on the air. Maybe 2 hours every 2 or 3 days, and that was it. So it wasn't worth it. Then they sold very, very few of them for quite a while.
But in Britain, the number of viewers had expanded to almost 100,000. The future seemed bright when suddenly progress came to an abrupt end with the beginning of World War II.
And then, of course, the famous day came. I think it was September the 1st, 1939, when it was decided from Broadcasting House that television must stop. And so a message was simply given to the engineers at Alexandra Palace: switch off everything, it's over. And it just so happened that it was in the middle of a film. It was a film I think is called Mickey's Hollywood Premiere or something like that. And halfway through, if you please, they hadn't even the courtesy or the taste to let us finish the film. They just cut it off like that.
Okay, I see you now.
And the screen went blank. And that was the end of television for the war, because there was a fear that enemy bombers could zoom in on the aerial, which was a wonderful guide to London.